It's already started happening. The Democratic Party has already started to fracture under the weight of this current election. We're already seeing some of the cracks because people within the Democratic Party, especially the more traditionally minded, more ingrained establishment Democrats, are starting to speak out against why they think they lost the seats in the House of Representatives, why they might lose the two remaining seats in Georgia and thus lose the Senate, and why this election was even as close as it was. And I think there's a lot of disconnect within the Democratic Party. The Republicans, they don't care who you are. You could be a neo-Nazi, a QAnoner, a Trump supporter, you could be a fiscal conservative. Generally speaking, if you're in that voting base, they're going to accept you, they're going to promote you, and they're going to deal with you. I don't know what the infighting looks like over there, generally speaking, but even when I do see glimpses of it, it seems like they still unite against the enemy that they see in the Democrats and democracy in general. And with the Democratic Party, there's just consistent infighting. And we on the left know this. It's probably a good chunk of the reasons why some people who are on the left went to the left, because they saw a lot of their positions being invalidated by the Democratic Party and feel like they don't have a voice anywhere. And this is still true with AOC, who has told the New York Times in an interview that she might quit politics, depending on the hostility of her own party towards the progressive causes that she's supporting. And when following this link, you come across the actual New York Times interview, and I've highlighted some very key things that I think need to be talked about within this article and some of the articles that I came across from both the Yahoo news source and where this New York Times article went. So coming from here, AOC on Biden's win, House loses, and what's next for the left? They end up linking to this article, which ends up talking about a lot of what's wrong within the Democratic Party. Amid tears and anger, House Democrats promise deep dive on election losses. And if you look at some of the things, Pelosi says, we did not win every battle, but we did win the war, which is generally a true statement, right? Like, Biden won. At the very least, fascism's been held back for 4 years. There's another person who says, we protected the firewall in our democracy. But then you start getting to the crux of some of the reasons why they want to claim that the Democrats couldn't succeed in this election. And we have a divided America. But if you have a problem, pick up the phone, don't tweet it out. The issue here is that tweeting has become more relevant than phone calls in a lot of our lives. Technology has changed, and a lot of the traditional Democrats don't want to catch up with that. If we go further, Representative Abigail Spanberger, who narrowly escaped... Did I say that right, Spanberger? Yeah. Who narrowly escaped defeat on Wednesday in conservative-leaning district in Virginia that Democrats had also tried to protect, chastised her progressive colleagues for embracing defund the police movement and for not pushing back forcefully against accusations of socialism. If Democrats did not acknowledge the election's results as a failure and change strategies, she said, using an expletive for emphasis, they would be crushed in future elections. Pelosi did disagree with this, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other people who have a very similar perspective, like Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina, who said that the party needs to overcome racial animus in the electorate and had to shy away from certain far-left policies that alienate key segments of voters if the Democrats want to win a pair of Senate seats currently in play in Georgia. Those two seats offer us the opportunity to change the dynamics. In the Senate, but if we're going to have to win those seats to do it. He said that he cautioned against running on Medicare for all, defunding the police, or socialized medicine, adding that if Democrats pursue such policies, we are not going to win. And then another representative talked about anti-fracking and said that all the people in South Texas hear is we're going to take away their jobs. So within this context, AOC and progressives like her, and a lot of the people who came out of like the Bernie Sanders kind of social democratic position, are finding themselves in a place where they're kind of being antagonized for their positions. And some of AOC's quotes within her interview kind of go to that understanding, and I think she speaks better on it than I ever could. But I'd like to elaborate on some of it and kind of highlight some of the key points, especially for people who might not be able to read the article. We're also concerned that progressive policies do not hurt candidates. Every single candidate that's co-sponsored Medicare for All in a swing district kept their seat. We also know that co-sponsoring the new Green New Deal was not a sinker. Mike Levin was an original co-sponsor of the legislation, and he kept his seat. So the idea that them backing any of this progressive legislature is somehow sinking seats clearly isn't the case. If every single person who co-sponsored Medicare for All in any sort of swing space, any sort of space that a Republican could have taken, they kept it, right? So that means that the voting base, at least in those areas, is receptive to the idea of Medicare for All. It wasn't an issue that pushed them away from it, and they said, oh, this candidate supports socialism, so we're going to not vote for them. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. The party is going to be, if the party's going to be honest and doing a real post-mortem about actually digging into why they lost. So I highlighted this because it's very easy to just cast blame out and to say, oh, well, you didn't, it's these socialists, it's these progressive-minded people, it's all the people who have these other positions from what my constituents have. Instead of learning to reach out and try to reframe the narrative that the Republicans are throwing out, that socialism is the devil and is going to ruin all of society. Like, we need to start addressing that fear within the right in order to start bringing them further to the left. And, you know, that's not what we're doing here. Instead, we'd rather infight and start to bicker and blame and start punching left instead of punching right. And this consistently happens within the Democratic Party because it honestly feels sometimes like they have no vested interest in actually working with anybody on the left. And they don't. They have a lot of positions that are antithetical to what leftists stand for. And rather than have a coalition with us, they'd rather risk fascism, apparently. You know, and I do say that we should have supported them in this election. I still commit to that, right? Voting for Biden and voting as democratic as possible in this two-party system is better than the Republicans. It's better than letting the country head towards the cult of personality and fascism. But at the end of the day, it's not enough. It's really not. And, and then we get into the technological factor again. I don't think anybody who is not on the internet in any real way in the year of our Lord 2020 and loses an election can blame anyone when you're not even really on the internet. If you're not spending $200,000 on Facebook, you are not firing on all cylinders. I think that's actually one of the most important things because Facebook has been a huge platform for right-wing propaganda. They throw up anything on there and everybody believes it. They throw on memes, they have entire campaigns devoted to it. And if you want to see any sort of systematic change and the Democrats actually coming out in favor of this, you need to start appealing to a lot of the, you know, conservative moms, you know, type population who are on Facebook. You need to start reaching out to a lot of the Facebook crowd. And yeah, they typically are the older generation, but that's who's coming out to vote in these elections. So reach them. A lot of them have reached the internet age, even if it's just Facebook. And then AOC goes on to say, our party isn't even online, not in a real way that exhibits competence. And she's right. When you see a lot of the right-wing people who have been on YouTube, they get funding, they get backed, they get promoted. You get a lot of the grifter types who are just able to get funding and have their money funneled. And yeah, of course, a lot of them are billionaires that are able to fund these projects, but we're like grassrootsing it for the most part. There's very few of the people on the left, and even in BreadTube, who are making like a substantial level of anything, let alone their sustenance if they're in that place and position, right? And to have a party backing some of the larger minds might actually listening to them and letting them platform for themselves in the way that they've continued doing and just calling people's attention to these videos, maybe it would make some change. Maybe it would make a difference. maybe we'd actually be able to get some people supporting the party. Because if you're not online, you don't have a presence there. You're not in the real world right now. Online is part of the real world. It's something that I personally struggled with for many years too, being very fearful of the online presence, especially of right wingers and how predominant, like how forceful their voice seemed to be. The anti-SJW movement in recent years. She goes on to say further, I think a lot of Democratic strategy is to avoid actually working through this, just trying to avoid poking the bear. That's their argument with defunding the police, right? To not agitate racial resentment, I don't think is sustainable. And this is going off of what I said before, where you have to examine why it is that these policies are not reaching people. Clearly, there's a demand within the Democratic Party to defund the police, to reduce the amount of policing in communities. And if we were to able to actually explain to people and reach people as to why this is the case, and this doesn't have to just be in long-winded political, speeches that seem disingenuous all the time. It's memes, it's joking, it's reaching out to people, it's speaking to them on their level and getting them to see defunding the police isn't as scary as it sounds. Having a social worker show up at your door is probably a lot less scary than having a cop show up at your door, especially if you're black or brown. That's just a true statement. And, I think she's completely right with that. So here, the leadership and elements of the party, frankly, people in some of the most important decision-making positions in the party are becoming so blinded to this anti-activist sentiment that they're blinding themselves to the very assets they offer. And I think that's the other side of the internet argument. You have a lot of people on the ground protesting for, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and a lot of these general ideas that very much speak to leftists, right? Like, people shouldn't be allowed to exist. But when the Democratic Party's asked to back that, they'll back it during a political election year. They'll back it when they need the left to come out to vote, when they're really concerned. But at the end of the day, they stop there. The right, they see protests and rallies, they're sending everybody out there. Besides Trump, who likes to leave people out in the cold without buses. But most of them out there are nice as can be. They're supportive. They'll call to those rallies. That's why somebody like Trump can get along with somebody like Alex Jones to some extent, can get along with, I don't know, anybody else on the right who just generally is in any position to support the Republican Party. They'll nitpick at each other a little bit, but they're all in cahoots with each other. They know what they need. They know what they want. And AOC even goes on to say, the movement for Black Lives is not the enemy. That Medicare for all is not the enemy. This isn't even just about winning an argument. It's that if they keep going after the wrong thing, they're just setting up their own obsolescence. Yeah, they are old, primarily. They are out of touch with the reality of the current generation. They're out of touch with the people who are 16 right now. Not that I'm pretending that I am, that are 16 right now who are going to be able to vote in the next 2 years. They're out of touch with a lot of the 24-year-olds and 30-year-olds and even 40-year-olds who are just not seeing this as a valid version of the Democratic Party anymore. They need to realize that people's needs have changed, and maybe some of them in more conservative areas are afraid to take that step. But you have to. You have to start laying the groundwork for the next generation of Democrats behind you, or else your party's just going to sink. When I did some activism work back in the day, this is one of the issues I had when I tried to work with anybody who associated with the Democratic Party. It was always this very strong position of activism being pushed to the side, movements being pushed to the side, and just trying to preserve the status quo and a traditional, class within the Democratic Party. Externally, there's been tons of support, but internally, it's been extremely hostile to anything that even smells progressive. I genuinely don't know. I don't know if I want to be in politics. It's the stress, it's the violence, it's the lack of support from your own party. It's your own party thinking you're the enemy. How many times have we heard this from leftist circles? The Democrats just think of us as the enemy, and we've decided to label them in quite the same way, because this is how they respond. As soon as they get what they want, as soon as fascism's been stopped and they can go back to their normal everyday life, they end up stopping short of any actual real progressive change. She wants to show that this movement also isn't that it's real, that it wasn't a fluke, that people really want to guarantee healthcare, and that people want Democratic Party to fight for them. You know, having a party to fight for you would be nice in this capitalist system. Single voices are really hard to actually stand up. We're not in a true democracy. We're not in a communistic place. We're not in like an ideal like anarcho-communistic place. We're not in that space where a single voice can actually do as much as we'd like it to, right? Like, we don't have the space where we're actually voting for our beliefs and our things. And as long as we're in the party system, the Democratic Party, being the further left, needs to be the one to fight for a lot of people, and they just don't care. And she says, you know, and she goes on to say, I'm serious when I tell people the odds of me running for higher office and the odds of me just going off trying to start a homestead somewhere, they're probably the same. And again, as a leftist, that's a sentiment that I've considered too. Maybe instead of fighting the good fight, you know, when I went through a lot of the stuff that I went through and burned out from activism in certain moments, I was like, I just want to go somewhere. I just want to run off somewhere and live in the woods and just be by myself. Because it's frustrating when you feel that level of antagonism towards you, when you feel like the people who should be kind of on your side, you know, they just tear you apart, and it's frustrating and it's hard. We need to start coming together and stop taking stances where every little fault of a human being is taken into such context, like where we try to throw these ideas under the bus, where we're attacking ourselves in such a strong way. I don't know, we need to do better about that, and I don't even know where to start. And concluding this and just wrapping this up, even Business Insider had a few quotes that were a little bit, you know, talking about this, and I just wanted to quickly, just briefly go over that, because they elaborated on Spanberger's response. We need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. We lost good members because of that. And that's really a big part of the issue, right? We need to stop using the word socialist or socialism. But the problem is the Republican Party's just going to use that word. If we don't reclaim that word, if we don't change the perspective on that word, if that word doesn't become the, you know, change from being the image of everything evil and wrong with the Cold War era and all this stuff, and it doesn't start getting changed to even the more mild perspective of the European Union and Democrat, you know, the types of socialism that they have over there, which is not true socialism, but at least it's more progressive, right? We need to start changing that perspective, because that is where we get hit. That word is such a boogeyman. And let's see, you know, AOC ends up talking more about how during a pandemic, we had awful execution on digital. We almost, you know, all the Democrats that struggled were not online. Again, same things that we were saying. And there was a California Democrat who said, I think Republicans did get some traction trying to scare people on the socialist narrative, and kind of saying that even though the fears are bogus, that maybe we need to move away from that. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about changing the name of socialism, because I feel like the Republicans are just going to keep using it. And if we just end up in that place where they keep using it, we have to learn to defend it and kind of come up and say, no, this is what socialism really is. This is what it could be. And I think with more media presence, more YouTubers, more backing of people within the party who've already spoken about this, and swinging the party to the left, we'd actually be able to reach people. Tell people to go watch some of the YouTubers out there who are making content and already doing most of the work for you for free. Take advantage of it. It's out there. You don't even have to do much. Link them a YouTube clip. Send them some tweets. Like, it's not that difficult. And with that said, my name is Anarchistara, and I hope you've enjoyed watching.